Remember Shelley in his essay Defense of Poetry says that one function of poetry is to rip away the veil of familiarity from the world and make the world feel fresh and new. Put another way, we can say that poetry takes what seemed predictable, familiar, conventional, staid, stale, boring, given. Poetry takes what seems given and in making it suddenly seem fresh and interesting and exciting and unpredictable, reanimates the world for us. One might say that boredom is the great problem of life. uh, the inability to perceive things in their freshness. Rather, we tend to reduce things to concepts in our mind. Blake calls them ratios. We tend to reduce things to concepts in our mind, and we're constantly translating what is different into the same, what is unfamiliar into familiarity. And because of this, the world can appear a pretty static, uninteresting place. We might say that poetry, and indeed all art, precisely is valuable because it is able, at its best, to defamiliarize the familiar. I've used this phrase before to talk about what poetry can do. Art, too. I've borrowed it from a school of literary criticism from the early 20th century known as Russian formalism, where the theorists argue that literary language, in contradistinction to non literary language, is constantly defamiliarizing the familiar, making the comfortable seem strange. Shelley has something like this in mind in his defense of poetry. Think of it this way. If you read Emily Dickinson's poem, there's a certain slant of light in winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral soons. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any. 'Tis the sealed despair and imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. When you take in a poem like that and you then see light in winter, you don't see it the same way as you did before. Suddenly, the light has become strange. It's become othered. It's dense. It's rich. It's layered. It's brims with meaning in ways it did not before. Emily Dickinson has defamiliarized the familiar, and we can think of this is one example of thousands. You can think of almost any of Van Gogh's paintings of ordinary objects like shoes, boots. When you see his painting of peasant boots, then boots don't appear to you in the same way either. Now, I'm going into this level of detail to move toward a major moment in Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. And that is the moment after Asia converses with Demogorgon deep in the abyss and learns that all is fated, all is controlled, nothing has agency except for love. Love is the site of agency. And when she reaches this conclusion, again, in an abyss that itself seems to be a reservoir of pure potentiality, of energy that's not yet found actuality, when she realizes this, her very self moves from adulthood or actuality back to childhood or potentiality. It's as if her own being becomes defamiliarized and she becomes a site not of this is a particular history that has led to certain ways of seeing, but instead she is pushed back to pure possibility. Her own being has become strange to her, new to her, unpredictable to her. And in this space of unpredictability, in this space of not yet having a sense of what's going to happen next, there is hope. Just as when the slant of light that seems so boring to me suddenly becomes a space where I can think very deeply about possibility and meaning and interpretation, there's a kind of hope in that too, because the world has become re-enchanted. It's become uh, valuable in another way. So after after Asia learns about this, Panethea sees her, and suddenly Asia reveals herself in all of her glory. She brightens up and appears like this. Panthea says, "Oh my gosh, thou art changed. I dare not look on thee. I feel, but see thee not. I scarce endure the radiance of thy beauty. Some good change is working in the elements which suffer thy presence unveiled. The Nereids tell that on the day when the clear high line was cloven at thy uprise, and thou didst stand within a veined shell which floated on over the calm floor of the crystal sea among the Aegean isles, and by the shores which bear thy name. Love, like the atmosphere of the sun's fire filling the living world, burst from thee and illumined earth and heaven." So Asia becomes a Venusian figure. She becomes like Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and her birth is imagined by Panethea as her rising from the sea on a shell, which is, of course, one version of how Venus came into the world. There's that famous painting of Botticelli's that shows the birth of Venus. But more important for what I'm talking about in this particular talk is that when Asia reaches her full identity, she's come back to life fully as the goddess of love after having been sort of frozen in a valley for all the time that Prometheus was chained to the rock. She says, "My soul is an enchanted boat, which, like a sleeping swan, doth float upon the silver waves of thy sweet singing," referring to some spirits she's hearing in the abyss. "And thine doth like an angel sit beside the helm, conducting it, whilst all the winds with melody are ringing." So that her soul is symbolized as an enchanted boat, and it sails, and then it starts sailing down into an ocean, down into a sea of sound, down into an ever-spreading sound, and it continues to sail far away to a place without a course, without a star, but by the instinct of sweet music driven, till through Elysian garden islets, by thee, most beautiful pilots, where never mortal pen has glided, the boat of my desire is guided. Realms where the air we breathe is love, which in the winds and on the waves doth move, harmonizing this earth with what we feel above. So she's going to that the realm of love, which, as we know from Demogorgon, is the realm of possibility, is the realm of hope, is the realm where what seemed fixed now seems alive, or what seemed predictable now seems unpredictable. Love is precisely that power which rips away the veil of familiarity from things. If you approach a being, creature with love, you're very attuned to it as it is. You're less likely to reduce it to sameness. You want to be aware of its nuances and subtleties and strangeness. And so, appropriately, what happens? The soul of Asia moves backward in time. We have past ages, icy caves, and manhood's dark and tossing waves, and youth's smooth ocean, smiling to betray. Beyond the glassy gulfs we flee of shadow-peopled infancy, through death and birth to a diviner day. A paradise of vaulted bowers, lit by downward-gazing flowers, and watery paths that wind between wildernesses calm and green, peopled by shapes too bright to see, and rest, having beheld, somewhat like thee, which walk upon the sea and chaunt melodiously. So this is what love can do. It can move us from actuality to potentiality. It can move us from experience to innocence. It can ultimately move us from a sense of we are fated to live a certain way to a sense of we have multiple possibilities, if not infinite possibilities, for existence. And what is innocence? What is childhood? But precisely that, a sense of possibility. When you're a child, you think, oh, I might be anything when I grow up. I could be anything I want to. Now, of course, when you grow up, you become increasingly limited in your choices. You can only turn 13 years old once. You can only Have your first kiss once. You can only have your first sexual encounter once. You can only graduate from high school the first time once. College, graduate school, maybe. Getting married, maybe. Getting a job, maybe. Choosing a place to live, maybe. Buying a house, maybe. Until by the time you're 50 odd years old, you feel like there aren't that many possibilities left for you, that you can pretty much write out your life. You kind of have a sense of what your life's going to be like. Well, this is to live as if you're fated. This is to live as if your life is kind of a given. But if you suddenly see the veils of familiarity ripped away from your world, suddenly you have a sense of the world of renewed possibility. And you feel like a child. Not in some kind of sentimental sense, but in a cognitive sense. You feel like suddenly you have possibilities for existence that you didn't have before. And this is why you go to the art museum, isn't it? Or this is why you go see uh, the art movie. This is why you read poetry, not to learn about some kind of truth with a big T, or learn about goodness with a big G, or even beauty with a big B, but to feel refreshed, to come out of the museum or the theater or out of the poem feeling as if the world is different, feeling as if the world is renewed. Anything could happen. What might happen now? I thought I knew everything that would happen, but now anything can happen. So, like Asia, your soul has become an enchanted boat, and you have moved back down river, uh, back down the chronology, back down the history, and you're no longer an adult, but you are a child. And what might happen next? Well, if you read Acts 3 and 4 of Prometheus Unbound, you'll find out.